Well, idiots. Monday morning, where we review the Sunday morning news shows that we watch so that you don't have to. I'm Katie Halper.
And I'm Aaron Maté.
And we have some preemptive likers in the stream, and we love you. Look at these people. They're liking before it even starts. And we want you to like the stream because, thank you, Ramona, we want you to like the stream to beat back the corporate oligarchs who try to control the algorithm. So thank you for liking, and everyone else watching, please do like this right now. Also, please subscribe, youtube.com/usefulidiots, and also subscribe to our Substack, which is usefulidiots.substack.com. Also, hi everyone watching us on Rumble. And of course, you're also welcome to subscribe to us if you prefer locals, then go to usefulidiots.locals.com. And on both Locals and Substack, you get exclusive content. So we want to thank you all. Also, we're going to be on call-in for the hottest after party taking place at 11 a.m. anywhere in the world. So you're invited to that too, and that's where we take your calls, and that's fun. And everyone tweet this out, including my co-host.
Done and done.
Nice. All right. So what do we got? We're going to start, as we always do, with the Chuckster.
Morning. As the war in Ukraine, good Sunday morning. As the war in Ukraine enters its second year, the question is, what will victory look like? It's pretty clear no one involved, not the United States or our European allies, Ukraine or Russia, can afford for this war to be in the same place it is today, going into year 3, a year from now. And yet both sides, President Biden in a surprise visit to Kyiv and Vladimir Putin this week in Moscow, prepared the world for a drawn-out conflict.
1 year into this war, Putin no longer doubts the strength of our coalition, but he still doubts our conviction. He doubts our staying power. But there should be no doubt. Our support for Ukraine will not waver. NATO will not be divided, and we will not tire.
We decided to conduct a special military operation.
We will not tire. From Sleepy Joe.
Yeah, right. I'll be napping in the White House basement, but in spirit, I'll be awake.
Step by step, we will continue to resolve the objectives that are before us. They started the war, and we used the force in order to stop it.
Now, Biden's visit to Ukraine was the first time.
The force reminded me of a little bit of Star Wars.
Yep.
We're using definitely. The force, yeah. Or as they say in Spaceballs, the Schwartz. May the Schwartz be with you, Mel Brooks. All right.
Now, Biden's visit to Ukraine was the first time in modern history that a sitting U.S. president has visited an active war zone without a U.S. military presence. And Biden has hitched his legacy to the success of this war. Can he afford for it to drag on into the year 2024 and the inevitable presidential campaign? The American public is already divided on providing ongoing support to Ukraine, split 49-47 on whether Congress should provide more weapons and funding. Isolationism among Republicans is growing, with the leading presidential hopefuls.
Isolationism is such a strange term. So if you support flooding a country with weapons and using it for a proxy war, that's not isolationist. If you just want to leave the rest of the world alone, then that is isolationist. It's like being like, I don't know, if I don't want to go rob and destroy someone's house, then I'm an isolationist, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are elements of the Republican Party that are isolationist, but I think that it also often has a negative connotation.
Well, for Chuck, it does have a negative connotation because it's like it's presumed that we have the right to be meddling everywhere and, you know, using other countries for our benefit. And if you don't support that, then you're an isolationist, which is just a strange term.
Well, to be fair, what's pathetic is that in terms of the political parties, it is an isolationist segment that cares about this, because although, you know, Congressman McCall likes to pretend that both wings have anti-war segments to it. And while that's true in terms of the population, he likes to pretend that both political parties have wings that are anti-interventionist. And that's, of course, sadly not true, as we've pointed out many times.
Absolutely. Yes.
out there right now trying to show some distance from the Ukraine war. On Friday, despite Ukraine's request and a growing bipartisan chorus in Congress, President Biden made it clear he is ruling out providing F-16s for now. Meanwhile, Russia has sustained nearly 200,000 casualties, 8 times higher than U.S. casualties in the 2 decades of war we waged in Afghanistan. Moscow.
He should say, according to the Pentagon, because that is who is telling him that. And maybe it's true, but he should at least cite his source. That's the Pentagon telling him to say that.
Right.
Hasn't been independently verified. Like Russia hasn't said, like Russia does not say we've lost 200,000 people. Russia's official toll is far less. And I suspect it's maybe somewhere in between the two. But certainly for Chuck to just assert that it's 200,000, he's just saying that because the U.S. government told him to say that. Right.
And of course, the U.S., as we know from like the Afghanistan papers, right, kind of famously downplayed the negative effects of the Afghanistan war on the United States.
On everybody, sure.
Yeah, on everybody, sure, right. I guess, but the just to make the parallel with here with these numbers, yeah.
Yeah.
Moscow's winter offensive has so far delivered just minor territorial gains. The only potential beneficiary of a protracted conflict may be China. Which offered a peace plan, by the way.
Remember, this is, of course, the Thomas Friedman declaration that was made last week on Meet the Press. And now Chuck Todd is just saying it as fact.
Maybe China's a reason why we had this war to begin with. It's all China's fault.
I think so, yeah.
Russia's just a pawn in China's evil game. Yeah.
This is just a test run for Taiwan.
If it were true that the only state that would benefit from a prolonged conflict, then why has the U.S. put so much effort into prolonging the conflict? There's been so many efforts at diplomacy before Russia invaded, afterwards, and every time the U.S. has blocked it and has continued to prolong the war with weapons. So maybe the U.S. is doing China's bidding.
Right. That's it. Yeah. I mean, their official excuse, right, which we'll see them make today very explicitly, of course, is that they just want to help with the territorial gains that Ukraine makes.
Oh, yes.
Because we're selfless like that. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. All righty.
Ukraine did not reject out of hand. The U.S. did, and it is still leveling accusations at maybe China, which offered a peace plan, by the way, that Ukraine did not.
Don't you love this? He's saying that China is the only country that's benefiting from extending this war, which offered a peace plan, by the way. Just coincidentally.
Yeah. They're benefiting from the war, but they also offered a plan to end it.
Yeah. By the way.
Go figure.
Winter offensive has so far delivered just minor territorial gains. The only potential beneficiary of a protracted conflict may be China, which offered a peace plan, by the way, that Ukraine did not reject out of hand. The U.S. did, and it is still leveling accusations that China is considering providing lethal aid to Russia.
Wait, but I thought that the U.S. was all about Ukrainian self-determination. And it's up to Ukraine whether to reject or embrace a peace plan or any plan for that matter.
Yeah, void where prohibited. So when the U.S. actually doesn't want Ukraine to negotiate, then that whole thing about Ukrainian agency is void. And it's interesting. The U.S. is more hostile toward the Chinese peace plan than Ukraine is, which says a lot.
Yeah. I'm actually impressed that they were like Ukraine was even allowed to opine on it without getting U.S. approval.
I'm sure that'll be corrected.
Yeah.
Officials tell NBC News that intelligence suggests that aid includes artillery and ammunition. But as U.S. officials...
So we talked about this on Useful Idiots recently, where just as China was putting forward this peace plan for Ukraine, all of a sudden the U.S. came out with this allegation that China was considering sending lethal weapons to Russia. And the aim of that was to discredit, I think, any Chinese peace plan, because if they're thinking about arming Russia, then obviously they're not an honest broker. But just recently, or in the last few days in the Washington Post, there was an article that came out saying that U.S. officials, so the headline said this, have no evidence that China is actually providing any weapons to Russia, because I suspect this was just put out there to try to undermine any kind of Chinese peace plan.
Aaron, it's more of a vibe than evidence. They're picking up on a vibe.
Sound the alarm. On Friday, President Biden downplayed the threat from China.
I don't anticipate, we haven't seen it yet, but I don't anticipate a major initiative on the part of China providing weaponry to Russia.
There it is. So that was the warning, and I guess now already Biden's backing off of that. That was pretty fast.
Yeah, he probably saw our show last week.
But we're still going to hear some warnings about this today, because maybe not everyone in the Biden administration got the memo.
Mm-hmm.
One of those people is his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, who was on with the Chuckster. And first, let's hear him talking about the possibility of the U.S. helping arm Ukraine to retake Crimea.
President Zelensky did define victory, what he thought victory looked like, in August of last year. He said, Crimea is Ukrainian, and we will never give it up. This Russian war against Ukraine and against the entire free Europe began with Crimea and must end with Crimea, with its liberation. There's always been a hesitance among U.S. officials, Jake, and I know you're included here, about Crimea specifically, and it's always been, well, it's up to Ukraine. Well, President Zelensky said it. Victory is all of the territory back. Why don't we say the same thing now?
This is the classic Chuck Todd line of adversarial questioning, when you're only allowed to really press the government if you're encouraging them to be even more of a warmonger than they already are.
Right. That's the only direction you're allowed to go into.
Yeah. Why aren't we further risking World War III? And again, what he said about Crimea, just a quick correction. Crimea historically was always a part of Russia. It was transferred to Ukraine in the 1950s by the Soviet leadership as an administrative move, and the Soviet premier was from Ukraine. So this was some sort of sentimental thing for him to transfer Crimea to Ukraine's control, which at that point was a Soviet republic. And then since the fall of the Soviet Union, there's been a movement inside Crimea for independence. And if you look at all polls, including U.S. government polls, the majority of Crimeans want to be a part of Russia. And this happened in 2014 after a U.S.-backed coup took place, when Russia quickly seized Crimea because they were concerned about the site of their most important naval base falling into the hands of a coup government that wanted to join NATO. And so what gets ignored in all this discussion about Crimea is that background, and specifically what the wishes of the population there are. Because if you look at, forget the referendums that have been held, which the U.S. doesn't recognize. If you look at the polls, U.S. government polls, the majority of Crimeans want to stay a part of Russia. But all that gets omitted from shows like this.
Well, we have repeatedly talked about Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders. The question for us is, how do we put Ukraine in the best position on the battlefield so that they are ultimately in the best position at the negotiating table? And President Zelensky, as recently as this week, has said we are going to have to ultimately get to a diplomatic phase of this conflict. So from our perspective, our goal is to strengthen the hand of the Ukrainians on the battlefield so that they are in the strongest position with the most leverage when they get to the negotiating table, to ultimately achieve an outcome that restores Ukraine's full sovereignty and territorial integrity.
If they want to take Crimea militarily, will the United States help Ukraine do that?
Chuck, the critical thing right now is that they need to take back the territory in the south and the east that they are currently focused on, and we need to give them the tools to be able to do that. The question of Crimea and the question of what happens down the road is something that we will come to. Where we are right now is that we need to be focused on the immediate term, because it is critical that we move fast and we move decisively to help them take back the territory across that line of contact that Russian troops are currently occupying.
It sounds like you think the ideal outcome is Ukraine is able to take more territory back. Putin fears that he could lose Crimea, and he comes to the negotiating table to see if he can keep Crimea. Is that the best case scenario you're envisioning?
Again,
I mean, pretty perceptive from Chuck. I do think that is the U.S. strategy.
Yeah.
Because I do think I mean, there are people inside the U.S. government like Victoria Nuland who really want to help Ukraine retake Crimea. And they don't care if that risks World War III because Crimea has been officially annexed by Russia. It does host Russia's most important naval fleet. So there is the concern that Russia would use nuclear weapons to hold on to it. But other people recognize that Ukraine has no chance of retaking Crimea. So that's just not a feasible possibility. So that's kind of the debate inside the government right now. And you can tell what side Chuck is on.
Right.
Chuck wants World War III, basically.
Yeah.
But I think he's recognizing that there are people who realize in the government that Crimea is not going to be retaken by Ukraine.
Which again, not that obviously my position is not that the United States should be setting up a retaking of Crimea. But again, this just speaks to the fact that this is not about Ukrainian agency in either direction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I understand why you're asking the question, but you have to understand that from the United States' perspective, we're not going to negotiate over the destiny and sovereignty of another country. That is for their democratically elected president to decide. What we are going
Unless it's rejecting a peace plan.
Exactly. We're not going to negotiate. We're just going to reject negotiation. We're just going to block negotiation.
Right. Yeah.
As has been done pretty much before the war and after the war. I just wrote an article on my Substack about how, Zelensky was elected on this peace platform, right, to end the war in the Donbass that began in 2014. And when he came into office, I think you can look at what he did and point to genuine steps to try to implement it, try to end the war in the Donbass and implement the Minsk Accords, which is the internationally brokered agreement to end that war. But the problem is that, he had two problems. The far right of Ukraine were protesting him at every turn. They refused any kind of compromise with people inside Ukraine who identify with Russia, who live in the east in the Donbass. And also you had the far right U.S. government, which was allied with the far right of Ukraine and was blocking the Minsk peace process. The envoy to Ukraine at the time when Zelensky first came into office is named William Taylor. He's now a fixture of cable news, and he was like the hero of Trump's first impeachment. And he came to Zelensky, and this is newly reported in the Washington Post, and said, don't implement Minsk. It's a terrible idea. So that was the response of the U.S. government. It's like this internationally brokered peace deal to end this territorial dispute inside your country and avoid World War III. It's a terrible idea. And that's before the war. And since the war, we've covered this, all these peace initiatives. And every time, according to NATO allies like Naftali Bennett, the former Israeli foreign minister, according to Ukrainian sources, according to the Turkish foreign minister, every single time the U.S. has blocked it.
Right. The U.S. reminds me of like a parent of Ukraine, and they're like telling their kid, like, you have everything, whatever you want to do, you decide, it's up to you. And then the kid decides to do something. The parent's like, well, not this, not this. Yeah.
Not that. Yeah.
is give Ukraine the tools that it needs, as I said before, to be in the strongest possible position, to ultimately be able to convert battlefield gains into diplomatic leverage. That is the goal here. And that requires us to achieve those battlefield gains through the provision of military assistance to Ukraine.
The problem with all these Biden people is they're such loudmouths. So like Jake Sullivan says that, yeah, our goal is to give Ukraine the tools it needs to be in a better position to negotiate. He's also said out loud, he said this at the Aspen Security Summit last summer. He said that our goal in Ukraine is to hand Russia a strategic defeat so that we weaken elements of Russian power. There's nothing there about like helping Ukraine. That's just about weakening Russia.
Right.
So they can't help blurt out the truth sometimes. Just like Antony Blinken after the Nord Stream 2 pipeline was blown up, he couldn't contain himself when he said that this is a tremendous opportunity, right? They're blabbermouths. And so it constantly means they undermine everything that they espouse.
Well, it's funny to call Jake Sullivan a loudmouth blabbermouth, just because I've never seen someone as unanimated as he is, a loudmouth. He's like the least animated loudmouth. Yeah.
Or like Victoria Nuland, who said recently how gratified the Biden administration is that the Nord Stream 2 is a hunk of metal at the bottom of the sea. Like, who says that? Who says that out loud? Like,
tends not to be super excited about it. Yeah. Well, we got some more Sullivan, right?
More Sullivan. Yeah, more exciting element.
The Western allies on board with the immediate response that you want to do with China, or is that going to be a slog?
We've actually had intense and very positive consultations with our NATO allies, with other members of the coalition supporting Ukraine. And in fact, Chuck, they're taking steps themselves to communicate to Beijing. Senior officials from Europe are directly talking to senior officials in China, expressing their own strong warnings about China moving forward in this regard.
So you believe that the severe consequences the U.S. would level, that our European and NATO allies would go along with them?
Well, in staying away from microphone diplomacy, I will stay away from hypotheticals. All I will say is that we have had extremely effective, constructive discussions with our European allies about this contingency. I think we're all on the same page about our concern, our alarm were this to happen. We all see the same thing right now, which is China has not moved forward, and we will deal with the circumstance should it come to pass.
Yeah. So again, peace plan, China, no good. But yet we love Ukrainian agency. We respect it so much.
Yeah.
That's the theme.
They're like bi-curious when it comes to agency.
Agency curious. Yeah.
Agency curious. Yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. More Jake?
Yeah, one more Jake. And then we're going to switch to another Sullivan.
Is the peace plan that China put out, many United States administration officials have essentially dismissed it out of hand, but President Zelensky didn't. What do you make of his decision, and is that a smart move by him?
Well, what President Zelensky said were there were parts of the plan he didn't like and parts of the plan that he thought could be okay. One part of the plan that I particularly liked is point one of the plan. Point one of the plan was respect the sovereignty of all nations. The plan could just stop there because Russia could end this war by respecting Ukraine's sovereignty.
Yeah, that's going to work. I like Jake. He's such a realist.
Yeah.
And pulling out. But what President Zelensky also said, and this is critical, Chuck, is that he would like to speak to President Xi. China put forward this plan without having had a single conversation since the war began between President Xi and President Zelensky. The Chinese have talked to the Russians a lot, but at the most senior levels, they have not talked to the Ukrainians. And it's very difficult to advance any kind of peace initiative when there's that kind of one-sided diplomacy going on. So from our perspective, the critical thing is that any peace plan offered by anybody has to involve the input of Ukraine. As President Biden has constantly said, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. And that goes for this initiative as well as any other initiative under the sun.
Well, touche, Jake. That's fair enough. If you want to be a broker, you have to speak to both sides. So I think you've actually made a good point. But the problem is when the U.S. speaks to Ukraine, they just tell them not to make peace. So he's pretending to respect Ukrainian agency, and you got to talk to them. The problem is when he talks to them, he tells them, no peace with Russia.
Right.
Yeah.
So pathetic.
Yeah. But
it'd be nice if the U.S. was talking to Russia too.
That would be great. Yeah. Yeah. Well, the unofficial slogan of Antony Blinken, the Washington Post reported this back in July. Blinken's unofficial slogan for Russia was "Do not engage." So he wouldn't even talk to anybody from Russia. There have been
sorry, keep going.
Well, there have been some contacts between the military, like some military officials, but in terms of our diplomats, like our top diplomat Blinken, do not engage.
Reminds me of Condoleezza Rice. No, actually, I don't want to give it away. We'll save that for later.
Now, I have the clip. Do we want it of what Jake Sullivan said back in July at the Aspen conference about what is okay? So let's go to that. Wilson, it is under. You see it there. And so he was talking to Jeffrey Goldberg of the Atlantic magazine, famously the guy who said that there was a connection between Saddam and Al Qaeda, and that's why we should go to war in Iraq. He's and also is a former Israeli prison guard. Yeah. So really stellar record there, which led him to, of course, edit the Atlantic magazine. But they were talking, and Jake said two very revealing things. He said, first of all, he said, I don't care about American public opinion. And then he said, I don't care about Ukraine. I just want to use it to hand Russia a strategic defeat. This is the clip.
How worried are you about the American people's staying power on this issue? Granted, there are no American troops involved, but we do have a short attention span. The war has become grinding in a kind of way. Do you worry about criticism that we're spending billions and millions of dollars to support Ukraine and not spending it here?
It's my job to worry,
No.
so I worry about literally everything. I worry about my answer to this question. So yes, I guess I worry, but in a way that's sort of not saying anything at all.
This is the being John Malkovich portion of our session.
But fundamentally, no. And I think it's very important for Putin to understand what exactly he's up against from the point of view of the United States' staying power. Number one, Congress passed a $40 billion package for Ukraine, of which a substantial amount remains. And we are working on a month-by-month basis to move weapons at a pace, as I said before, that the Ukrainians can actually absorb and get out onto the battlefield with trained personnel to deploy them. That can go on just on the basis of what we have already had allocated to us in resources for a considerable period of time. And then I strongly believe that there will be bipartisan support in the Congress to re-up those resources should it become necessary. Does that mean that there is the same level of intensity in the American public as there was in the early weeks of the war? Is it on TV 24/7? No. But is the reservoir of support in this country, as translated into the Congress and the executive branch, deep and sustainable from the point of view of doing whatever it takes for, as the president has said, as long as it takes? Yes. And I actually believe that that is basically true, despite the difficulties that Europe is facing on energy, for the major European countries as well. And you see, actually, in a way, the issue today is not wavering of public support for Ukraine, but still upward pressure on governments there to do more and to supply more weapons and to go further with respect to sanctions. And you just saw the European Union take yet another step with its 7th package of sanctions this week alone, at the very time that all the headlines are saying somehow there's flagging interest in this issue.
I like that he's, yeah. Well, I like that he admits that political power, political representatives do not represent their constituents.
Yes.
He's like, are there people, is the public getting less enthusiastic and supportive of the of funding this proxy war? Yes. Does that, do we see any effect in terms of what politicians are doing or saying? No.
I misremembered that clip, so my bad. He doesn't, that in that clip, there's not the talk of what the U.S. goal is. There's only the talk of we don't care about American public opinion. That's what that clip is. But it's still very funny. And I don't know. The idea of like our staying power is kind of, I don't know. It sounds kind of like we can hang. We can hang. Right. We can last long. So anyway, yeah. Well, thank you, Jake. Always great to hear from you. Let's move on to another Sullivan. This is a Republican senator named Dan Sullivan from Alaska. And he's got thoughts about the war in Ukraine too, because of course, the people of Alaska, when they elect a representative, they want someone who will be steadfast in pouring their money into a proxy war.
Your take on the growing, look, this isolationist wing of the GOP used to basically be Ron and Rand Paul. It's bigger than that now. How much of it do you think is sort of genuine sort of leeriness of interventions because of Iraq and Afghanistan on the right? And how much of it do you think it's simply because Biden's a Democrat?
Look, I think you've always had on both sides kind of the wings of each party an isolationist tendency. And I think that this war...
No, you've always had on both sides like people who aren't in lockstep with invading other countries and destroying them and spending tens of billions of dollars on weapons. It's weird fringe. It's weird. Yeah.
Also, it's not isolationist on the left. It's anti-interventionist, but that's a difference that is lost on them.
Yeah, it's like it's not isolationist. It's just basic human decency. We don't want to kill other people.
Right.
If someone doesn't want to murder someone, doesn't make them an isolationist. It just makes them a human. Right.
Not wanting to invade Iraq was not an isolationist position.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it was to the extent to that Republicans didn't want to, but
Party, an isolationist tendency.
I mean, like, what a strange way of looking at how to be a human. If you don't want to kill someone, you're an isolationist. Right. You know, there's got to be a different term for it.
And I think that this war in particular, you're right, the polling is starting to show a lack of support. And I think that there are ways that you can address this. A lot of Republicans say, hey, we should be doing more on our own border, not the Ukraine-Russia border. My response to that is, hey, great powers can do both things, but it is important to address our own border, to secure the border. That would take away one of the arguments. Something else, and I hear from Alaskans.
You know, at least he didn't say we can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Right.
You know, so credit to him for coming up with a new way to say that. Good for him. Yeah.
All the time on this. We need to do a better job. The administration needs to do a better job of getting our European allies to pull their weight, as you know.
Okay, so he's saying that something he hears from Alaskans all the time. Hold on, let's just set this up again.
The administration needs to do a better job.
Oops, hold
on. Border, to secure the border. That would take away one of the arguments. Something else, and I hear from Alaskans all the time on this. We need to do a better job. The administration needs to do a better job of getting our European allies to pull their weight, as you know.
You know, Alaskans are always saying this. When are the Europeans going to pull their weight on this? That is what they are asking. They're clamoring. They want to know. They want more. They want Europe to up their game.
Huge rallies in Anchorage right now for the Europeans to pull their weight.
Yeah.
What do we want?
Had a commitment.
Europeans to pull their weight.
When do we want it? Now.
To spend at a minimum, and it should be a floor, not a ceiling, 2% of their GDP on defense. The vast majority of the NATO allies that we have don't do that. And I think that...
All right, this guy's too boring. And Chuck is even bored of this guy. So we can move on. This is, wow.
Well, at least we got the breaking news, which is that we know where he has his finger on the pulse of the Alaskan people. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Alaskans really want the European allies to pull their weight.
Yeah. All righty. What do we got next? I think we got some more Sullivan for you later on, but we're going to take a Sullivan break.
Okay. So the director of the CIA gave a rare interview to Face the Nation about China, Ukraine, all the good stuff. William Burns is his name. Oh, and by the way,
went back to Kyiv.
By the way, let's just point out that so here on the Sunday News shows this week, you had two of the main principals who are named in Cy Hirsch's story about how the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream 2, Jake Sullivan and William Burns. And of course, accordingly, they were asked 0 questions about Cy Hirsch's story. Last week, it was Antony Blinken, no questions about Cy Hirsch's story. So I wonder how long these Biden principals will go without being asked about this. And I suspect forever.
Me too.
Yeah. You recently went back to Kyiv and you met with President Zelensky. And 3 months ago, I understand you met with Russia's top spy chief. Is there any kind of opening that you are finding here? Any kind of opportunity?
No, I mean, the conversation that I had with Sergei Narishkin, the head of Russia.
By the way, it looks a lot like Ron Wyden, but that's neither here nor there.
Russia's external intelligence service was pretty dispiriting. My goal was not to talk about negotiations. That's something the Ukrainians are going to need to take up with the Russians when they see fit. It was to make clear to Narishkin and through him.
You know, Burns says he wasn't there to talk about negotiations, but you know what the name of Burns's memoir is?
What?
The Back Channel.
Oh, wow.
It's about how he spent his career as a diplomat trying to negotiate back channels to foster negotiations, whether it's with Russia or Iran. And so I suspect maybe there was more to his discussion with his Russian counterpart than he let on, but who knows?
To President Putin, the serious consequences should Russia ever choose to use a nuclear weapon of any kind as well. And I think Narishkin understood the seriousness of that issue, and I think President Putin has understood it as well.
There's not a lot of contact with Russia right now.
There's not a great deal, you're right.
But you still have that line of communication with your
Yeah, and I think
counterpart.
even in the most deeply adversarial relationships, and that's certainly what our relationship with Russia is today, it's important to have those lines open. And the president,
AKA a back channel.
Right. Surprised he's not trying to plug his book.
Well, it's awkward for him right now to mention it because the book is all about, like, you know,
Right.
how diplomacy works, and it's good to have these back channels, and how he was a big part of it. But now he's the director of the CIA, which you're not supposed to be for diplomacy. You're supposed to be undermining it. So
Right.
he's in a tough position. But you know, his book, I mean, he's the guy who wrote that famous cable to the Bush administration back in 2008 called "Niet Means Niet," and it's all about how across the Russian political spectrum, from Putin to Putin's most bitter opponents, everybody says that Ukraine is a red line, and that if the U.S. continues to try to keep bringing Ukraine into NATO, there's going to be a war. That was back in 2008, and so which proved to be very prescient. And so he knows all this. He knows the consequences of the policies that he's overseeing.
the president believes that.
What do you walk away from those conversations with? You said it was dispiriting. Why?
There was a very defiant attitude on the part of Mr. Narishkin as well, a sense of cockiness and hubris, reflecting Putin's own view, his own belief today that he can make time work for him, that he believes he can grind down the Ukrainians, that he can wear down our European allies, that political fatigue will eventually set in. And in my experience, Putin's view of Americans, of us, has been that we have attention deficit disorder and we'll move on to some other issue eventually. And so Putin, in many ways, I think, believes today that he cannot win for a while, but he can't afford to lose.
Interesting how we've heard two references to ADD today. William Burns said it, and Jeffrey Goldberg said it too. You know, there is maybe a little self-consciousness on the part of the U.S. about the attention span of this culture. You know,
Right. It's good. They're maybe if they could focus on that instead of being so belligerent.
I hear that. Sure.
Safer world. Yeah.
Yeah. Amen. Amen to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mindfulness. It is mindfulness. Yeah. Less war, more mindfulness. Yeah.
I like it. I like it. Okay. One more from CIA Director William Burns.
Secretary Blinken said that the U.S. had picked up information over the last couple of months. But picking up information over the last couple of months to thinking they're actively considering it. I mean, how confident are you in the intelligence that this is something Xi Jinping himself may change his mind about?
And this is again the question of the U.S. claimed no evidence that China is going to arm Russia to fight Ukraine.
But we're confident that the Chinese leadership is considering the provision of lethal equipment. We also don't see that a final decision has been made yet, and we don't see evidence of actual shipments of lethal equipment. And that's why I think Secretary Blinken and the president have thought it important to make very clear what the consequences of that would be as well.
To deter it.
Yeah, to deter it, because it would be a very risky and unwise bet.
So they're trying to it's a fine balancing act, right? Because they have to vilify China to undermine their peace plan, but they don't want to ratchet things up too much with China.
Yeah. Or have to present any evidence.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's enough from William Burns. Thank you so much, sir. Great to see you.
Thank you for your service. Yeah.
Yeah. And keep on keeping on with that non-back channel. I'll just wink, because I know what you're up to, sir. I think I do at least. Anyway. Okay. Well, another eminent diplomat, someone who's brought so much joy to the world.
My fave.
Helped the world live in harmony is none other than the former Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, who such a legendary track record of bringing harmony and peace to the world, such as the war in Iraq. And here she is on Face the Nation.
You talk about delivering weapons to Ukraine. You wrote an op-ed with former Defense Secretary Bob Gates talking about this, saying have a dramatic increase in military supplies and capability. Does that mean train them yesterday on the F-16s they'll need tomorrow? Is that specifically the piece of weaponry you're focused on?
Well, we weren't talking about a specific set of weapon systems, but I think the idea that you anticipate and therefore perhaps you start the training before it's going to be necessary to send that equipment. The one thing we know is that this war keeps evolving, and you have to try to evolve a little bit ahead of it.
So you think President Biden's being a little too hesitant?
Well, I don't know internally. We have issues with stockpiles. We have issues with our own defense capabilities, because I don't think anybody expected to be fighting a land war in Europe.
Right.
And we have ADD, so it's hard to keep track of all these stockpiles because we can't focus on them. We're distracted.
And if she didn't have ADD, she'd remember to mention ADD.
And so I have some sympathy for.
It's so stunning, though, that this woman's an authority on any of these issues, given her track record in Iraq. But it's the American dream. You can, engage in an illegal, unjust, immoral war based on lies one day, and the next day you'll be on Face the Nation.
Fighting a land war in Europe.
Right.
And so I have some sympathy for that. But to the degree that that can be accelerated, I think it will help, because I think we have to get away from the phrase time is on the Ukrainian side. I would be careful about that. Vladimir Putin seems to believe the time is not on the Ukrainian side. He believes if he throws in the Russian way of war, mass at the problem, poor boys from Dagestan who are just kind of cannon fodder, if he engages in terrorist activities against.
As opposed to the U.S. way of war, which is to throw soldiers as cannon fodder into wars like the Iraq War.
Right.
Where, how many American lives, not to mention, of course, Iraqi lives, did she sacrifice?
Right. She cares a lot about the poor boys in Fallujah, for instance.
Yeah, exactly.
It broke her heart. Yeah.
The Ukrainian population. He'll wear the Ukrainians down. He'll wear us down. He'll wear the Europeans down. I don't think that's right, but we have to do everything that we can to convince him that it is indeed wrong.
I like the way Margaret Brennan's suggestion involves time travel. Should we be arming them yesterday to fight tomorrow?
Yeah. What she wants is to basically fight Russia to the last Ukrainian. That's pretty much the only strategy that she has.
Right.
Yeah. All righty. Well,
we got more Condi.
We got more Condi.
I hope you guys are into carbs, because we got more rice.
Absolutely.
Early stage of the 2024 presidential race. Foreign policy is already getting talked about a fair amount. Former President Trump criticized the amount of U.S. funding for Ukraine. Florida's Governor Ron DeSantis, widely expected to run, said the U.S. cannot provide Ukraine an open-ended blank check. They reject your point of view in many ways by saying the U.S. needs to kind of pull back here.
Well, I'm not going to put words in the mouth of future presidential candidates. We'll see where they end up. But I will.
Ron DeSantis.
Right. But I will say this: it is really important that whoever runs for president of the United States understands the essence of this conflict. The fact that we are defending not just Ukrainian independence, but we are defending a rules-based system that says might doesn't make right. You can't just extinguish your neighbor. And oh, by the way, for those.
You can't extinguish your neighbor, but you can invade and destabilize and ruin a country far away.
But you can't extinguish your neighbor, too. Is Cuba the U.S.'s neighbor? I mean, the U.S. has been strangling Cuba for decades. Is Venezuela the U.S.'s neighbor? The U.S. backed a coup in Venezuela. Haiti, the U.S. backed a coup. Again, I'm speaking just the Bush administration that she served under, like just her own record.
Yeah.
And it's amazing, of course, she said this many times. She said this also on Fox News not too long ago. But no one ever cuts in just to point out that the Bush administration destroyed all these countries, especially Iraq, but others too. Right. And no one ever just offers her even the mildest reminder of that.
Right. I mean, it's one thing on Fox News. You kind of expect that. But it would be nice if people at Face the Nation push back on it.
I expect more pushback at Fox News at this point.
Right. Yeah. Also, I like the way she had a Freudian slip and said she was defecting from the rules-based order.
Yes, that's right. Defecting. Yeah.
Oh, we ought to be concentrating on the Indo-Pacific because China is really our adversary. Xi Jinping, distinguish your neighbor. And oh, by the way, for those who would say, oh, we ought to be concentrating on the Indo-Pacific because China is really our adversary, Xi Jinping is telling you what he thinks about that, because he is not only watching what is going on in Ukraine, according to our intelligence, apparently, he's even considering getting in on the side of the Russians.
Why do you think he would make that judgment? Why is it in his interest to extend the war?
Yes, I think we have to recognize.
Because we're lying, because we're actually just making that up to undermine a peace plan. That's why he would, because he's actually not. But anyway.
But we're just going to accept it at face value that that's true.
Yes.
I mean, imagine if they actually connected the dots on all the things the United States did to get in the way of diplomacy.
That the Chinese-Russian relationship is perhaps more strategic than many of us had thought, that it really is a relationship that is aimed at the heart of U.S. power in the world. And that would say...
That's what this is about. So before she was talking about, the principles of might doesn't make right, blah, 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 blah. That's what she's actually concerned about, is anything aimed at U.S. power in the world. You can't have anyone that challenges U.S. dominance. That's what the issue is. I appreciate her honesty here.
Yeah.
Then these two are not divisible. So if you want to say, let's just concentrate on the Indo-Pacific, that's not going to work. And oh, by the way, many of our allies, Australia, Japan, fundamentally understand that. So I would say to those who are going to run for office, be careful what you say. And I would just make one other point. If the American people see a world in which Vladimir Putin...
Again, who is this Iraq warmonger to tell someone else to be careful what you say? And but yet it's this neocon wing that is still treated as the voice of authority on foreign policy, no matter what they do. It's pretty amazing.
Ridiculous.
All right, a little bit more Condi. This is a tough clip to get through.
And Xi Jinping have won this engagement, this first volley, if you will, in the largest strategic picture. And they see that Ukrainian independence has been extinguished. And they know that the United States could have done something about it. I don't think that's going to be a very good message for a future president to have to deliver.
Because that problem will come to his desk.
Because that problem will come to his desk.
Or her desk.
Or her desk. And I just say, just remember dates. 1914, 1941, 2001. These conflicts always come home.
How about 2003, the Iraq War? Maybe add that one.
It's hard to get there.
I like the message to 1914, the Great War, as it was called then, now called World War I. What's the lesson of that war? That you fund proxy wars?
Yeah.
How'd that war turn out?
And what's the lesson of 2001? You get attacked, and instead of trying to, hunt the perpetrators, you invade two sovereign countries, Afghanistan and Iraq. Iraq, which had nothing to do with 9/11, and Afghanistan, yes, Al-Qaeda was based there, but before the U.S. or after the U.S. invaded, before actually and after, it rejected any kind of diplomacy with the Taliban. The Taliban was actually offering to turn over bin Laden in some kind of way. Yeah, and then Rumsfeld said, no, we don't negotiate with terrorists. So the lesson is you reject all diplomacy, you invade and destroy two sovereign countries. And then, by the way, 10 years later, after 9/11, you side with the same group that attacked you, because the U.S., as Jake Sullivan wrote to Hillary Clinton, was on the same side as Al-Qaeda in Syria during the dirty war there. So that's the lesson, I suppose, that Condoleezza Rice wants to take from 2001.
She's so many really important lessons. We should write a book, Condi's Takeaways, where we say the things that she should be saying, but is too modest to say.
So much wisdom. All right, we have limited time left, so we've done a lot on Ukraine.
Let's skip to should we go to clip 11? Or
sure. Yeah.
Let's go to clip 11.
Let's do something domestic.
Yeah.
Back to the
Since
train
Biden isn't.
derailment in East Palestine. Mistake for him not to go? Should he go now? Is it too late?
He should go. This is an extraordinary event, not just for the people of East Palestine, but it has come to stand for something bigger in the country. And Democrats do have something to say to large forces, large corporate forces exploiting people in rural America. They're losing on the cultural issues, but as Bernie Sanders and some others have demonstrated, they can connect on that. And he left that trick on the table for Donald Trump to come in and say, I'm your guy.
What a weird way to describe speaking to residents of a toxic disaster and just overall delivering the message that we care about working people. He calls it a trick. He says Biden left that trick on the table by letting Trump do it. It's like, do you actually have convictions and values, or is everything just a political trick?
Right. I mean, it's true though, because he was able to troll them. But
yeah,
yes.
he was able to troll them. Yes, yeah. Trump was. Absolutely, he was.
And I'm impressed though that this you actually see someone though saying something remotely critical of Biden on Face the Nation. So congrats to Terry Morin for doing that.
Yeah, but it's just so revealing that he sees it as a trick, like a political tool, not anything to do with actually having
not a moral
principles. Yeah.
Even though it was the Trump administration which changed the regulations, which helped perhaps to contribute to this event, it came to stand for something big in the country, and we look to presidents for leadership on that.
Well, it's funny because while Biden was ignoring East Palestine, he was in Ukraine, and a lot of cable news pundits were falling over themselves to say what a brave, historic moment this was. Biden went into a war zone, even though, of course, the fine print, which nobody really acknowledged, but we did on Useful Idiots, was that the U.S. told Russia ahead of time that Biden was visiting Ukraine, so he was never in any danger. But anyway, as they're hailing him as his hero, here's actually someone saying, well, you know, why haven't you gone to visit the site of this horrible, toxic disaster? Which is true.
Right. Yeah. And let's see how other people respond to that question. Let's go to the next
clip. A big deal this week has been that President Biden was in Ukraine. He wasn't in East Palestine, where that train derailed with those toxic chemicals. Republican Josh Hawley said this week that the Republican Party can be the party of Ukraine and globalists, or the party of East Palestine and working Americans, not both. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a false choice. I think the president should have gone to Palestine when we had this major chemical spill. But it doesn't mean we disregard what's happening, this struggle for the global balance of power that we're facing right now.
We can walk and chew gum. We can walk and chew gum at the same time.
We
haven't seen anything like this since my father.
Yeah.
We can engage in a proxy war and also go visit, pop by a train derailment disaster.
Right. Yeah. Pop by, yeah. Not do anything about it necessarily, but yeah.
Father's generation, World War II. Largest invasion in Europe, the biggest threat to the Pacific since World War II. We can't put our head in the sand and ignore this. Otherwise, the Russians will be on the Polish border and Chairman Xi will invade Taiwan. I think we can do both. We're a great nation.
We're a great nation. We can do both.
But again, he didn't say we can walk and chew gum. Come on, just say it. Just say it. I know you want to. I know you, Michael. I know you want to, Michael McCall. Just say it. All righty. Well, should we hear more from Mr. McCall?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. He's a balloon boy, by the way. He's one of the balloon boys because he was one of those Republicans who was advocating higher military spending after the U.S. shut down a balloon, a Chinese weather balloon, and then 3 hobbyist balloons. And then he was one of the Republicans who was saying that Biden is weak on China and we need to spend more money on the military. So I call him a balloon boy.
Yeah. Pop it like it's hot.
Mm-hmm. An ABC Washington Post poll earlier this month found that 50% of Republicans believe the U.S. is doing too much to support Ukraine. We know you care very much about that. That's up from 18% last April. So why is the support slipping, and how will you approach that, and what can you do about that?
I think because it's taking too long. We're not giving them the weapon systems they need. That when we talk to President Zelensky, when I talk to our top military commanders say that they need in theater right now. Let's put that in.
The president, by the way, says that military advisors tell him they don't need those.
When the Supreme Allied Commander speaks, I listen. And just when they unlocked the Leopard tanks with Germany, putting in some Abrams tanks, we can do the same thing with all these other aircraft with F-16s, ATACMS.
But are you worried about the aid? Are you worried about the aid in this coming year? You can see there's some Ukraine fatigue. Clearly, one of the reasons President Biden went over there was to get support.
Of course. I mean, I am. I still think the majority in the Congress support this. They also want to know, they want accountability to the taxpayer. I did a first-hand, look at this in theater in Ukraine and in Poland about the humanitarian assistance. We have 3 IG audits right now. We have an audit by Deloitte. We also have end-use monitoring on the weapons and barcoding systems. They want to know that their money's being spent wisely. And I think once they know that, they will stand. What would Reagan do?
Oh, we have barcodes. We have barcodes to track the weapons. So, hey,
right.
Everything's great. This guy is a kid who is not happy with his Christmas toy haul this year. He wants more toys.
Right.
Toys being weapons. He wants more. He's been given a lot of weapons. Okay. Santa's been generous this year, but there's a spoiled brat who wants more weapons. It's not enough.
Also, he's asked a very good question, which is WWRD. What would Reagan do?
What would Reagan do? Yes.
Let's hear what he has to say.
I'd ask my fellow colleagues, right? What would he do? He brought down the Soviet Union. I think he would stand for freedom and democracy.
That's what he would do. I love that policy. Yep. Standing for freedom and democracy.
Yeah. Well, there's truth to what he's saying. Reagan did fund the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to help bleed the Soviet Union.
Right.
Prolong the war there in Afghanistan. It wouldn't have gone on for as long, I think, without the U.S. using Afghanistan to bleed the Soviet Union, kind of like what the U.S. is doing now with Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. Also funded the Contras.
Yes.
Trained the Contras. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yes. Okay. We are nearing the end of the show. I think we have time for what? One more clip?
Sure.
Do we want to stay on the topic of Ukraine? How are we feeling?
What are our options here?
Well, we could go back to Jake Sullivan, I guess, to talk about how daring Biden's trip to Ukraine was. Okay.
How are we on likes, by the way, Wilson? Just do a quick like count before our last clip.
I see 1,000 likes.
All right,
not
too bad. I mean, let's get it up to 1,200, guys. There are 200 of you out there who could like this. All right. Let's go.
We're joined now by President Biden's National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. Welcome, Mr. Sullivan, and welcome back. We know you were on that train with President Biden going in and out of Kyiv. Can you give us a sense first of what that was like? And I was told there was a special operations team on that train to help out in case anything went wrong.
Oh, this is good. I like that.
Well, first, thank you for having me, Martha. Well, we left from Washington, D.C. from a hangar at a nearby Air Force base in the middle of the night. And flew to Poland, where the president got into an unmarked SUV, not his normal limo that everybody is used to seeing, to take an hour-long drive to a train.
Wait, did he mention Germany? Did I miss that? He didn't mention Germany. He skipped over Germany. Okay, so they went to Germany first, then Poland. So he's skipping over a key part on that itinerary. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because, again, the dominant narrative we got is that Biden flew into this dangerous combat zone and he's so brave. And really, he took like 3 different stops beforehand and then took a train from the Polish border into Kyiv.
But he didn't use.
And they told Russia in advance. In advance.
Yeah, but Aaron, you're missing something really important. He was in a different car.
Okay, yeah, that's true.
I think he thinks he's like John le Carré here, narrating some spy novel. Yeah.
Yes, they do.
Where he boarded this train also in the dark of night. And the train had compartments to be able to work, small bunks to be able to sleep on. And of course, we had the president, a very small number of his team, including myself, and then a strong component of security. And I can't get into the specifics of who composed that security contingent, but he was well protected the whole way.
I really want to know the names of the people composing that security unit.
And note how he didn't tell us that they told Russia beforehand, which is like the most important part of this.
Right, of course, yeah.
They somehow keep forgetting when they tell the story of Biden's heroic journey into a combat zone in Kiev.
Yeah.
Kyiv. All right. Well, this has been another great show. Whoever is spamming us, like, is this how you want to spend your time? You know,
yeah.
in the chat. I mean, it's up to you.
Well, they're making a real difference. You know.
Yeah, I guess so. Anyway, we've had our spam defenses activated, so you know, I support that proxy war. I support that proxy war in defending our YouTube chat from spammers.
Yeah,
that's one proxy war I will support.
Well,
okay,
guys,
everyone.
We got some good news for you. It's not over. See you at Callin right now.
And in the meantime, go to usefulidiots.substack.com to sign up to support us and get bonus content. And we'll see you next time.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.